Imagine this for a moment: 10 seconds, a simple chair, and a quiet decision to stand. No weights, no machines, no dramatic test, just you and gravity. Yet in that brief moment, your body tells a story deeper than any scan or number ever could. It reveals how your brain speaks to your muscles, how confidence shapes strength, and how years of experience live inside your movement. This is not about passing or failing a test. It is about listening to what your body is asking for and discovering that even after 80, it may be capable of far more than you have been led to believe. Picture a simple chair, an ordinary moment, and a quiet request: stand up. No stopwatch in the hand, no pressure in the voice, just 10 seconds of time unfolding. On the surface, this appears to be a basic physical task, almost trivial, something most people never think about until it becomes difficult. Yet within those 10 seconds lies a remarkably rich dialogue, one that unfolds silently between the brain, the muscles, the joints, and the deeper rhythms that govern how the human body moves through time. When a person attempts to rise from a seated position, the brain begins by predicting the future. Long before the muscles contract, neural circuits calculate how much force will be needed, how quickly the center of gravity must shift forward, and how balance will be maintained once the body leaves the stability of the chair. This prediction is shaped by memory, by past successes and failures, and by subtle emotional cues such as confidence or fear. In youth, this prediction happens effortlessly. After 80 years of living, it becomes more cautious, sometimes overly so. The muscles receive this prediction as a signal. Not a command, but an invitation. The quadriceps, gluteal muscles, and the deep stabilizers of the trunk prepare to engage. At the same time, sensory information flows upward from the feet, the knees, and the hips, reporting back on pressure, joint position, and stability. The inner ear quietly contributes its assessment of balance, while the eyes offer spatial orientation. All of this happens in fractions of a second, forming a loop of communication that continues throughout the movement. What makes the 10-second stand test so revealing is that it does not isolate one part of the body. It exposes the quality of the conversation itself. If the brain hesitates, the muscles wait. If the muscles respond weakly, the brain grows uncertain. Time stretches, not because the body lacks strength alone, but because coordination has softened. In many older adults, this dialogue has been interrupted by years of reduced movement, injury, or an understandable desire to avoid discomfort and risk. From a scientific perspective, aging alters how information travels through the nervous system. Nerve conduction slows slightly, reflexes become less sharp, and the brain becomes more selective in how it allocates effort. This selectivity is not failure, it is efficiency developed over a lifetime. The problem arises when efficiency turns into avoidance. The body begins to favor safety over capability, and movements that were once automatic become cautious negotiations. 10 seconds, in this context, becomes a window into time itself. It reflects not just how fast the body moves, but how confidently it anticipates the next moment. A person who hesitates during the stand test may be physically capable of rising, yet mentally preparing for instability that may never come. The brain, attempting to protect the body, inadvertently limits it. This is why the test feels emotionally charged for some people. It is not merely a physical assessment, it touches the deeply human fear of falling, of losing independence, of time moving faster than the body can follow. There is also a metabolic conversation taking place. Muscles require oxygen and energy to contract efficiently. With age, blood flow can become less responsive, and muscle fibers may shift toward endurance rather than power. This does not mean strength is gone, but that it is expressed differently. Rising from a chair demands a brief surge of power, a quick coordination of effort. If the body has not practiced this surge, it feels unfamiliar, even threatening. Despite being well within physiological limits, the beauty of the 10-second stand test lies in its honesty. It does not shame the body or expose it to danger. It simply asks a question and listens to the answer. The answer arrives not as a number alone, but as a pattern of movement, a hesitation, a shift of weight, a moment of imbalance. These details are more informative than speed itself. They tell us where communication is strong and where it has grown quiet. In scientific research, such functional tests are valued because they reflect real life. Standing up is something we do dozens of times a day. It connects to walking, to climbing stairs, to recovering from a stumble. When this movement becomes difficult, it often signals broader changes in how the body interacts with gravity and space. The test acts as an early whisper rather than a late alarm, offering an opportunity for understanding rather than intervention born of crisis. Philosophically, the 10-second stand test invites reflection on how humans experience time as they age. Time feels different when the body moves differently. Slowness is often mistaken for decline, but slowness can also be awareness. The challenge is distinguishing between mindful movement and constrained movement. The test helps reveal whether slowness is chosen or imposed by fear and disuse. At its core, the test is a conversation about trust. Trust between the brain and the body, built over decades of movement. When that trust weakens, the body does not rebel, it waits. And waiting, over time, becomes habit. Understanding this allows us to approach the result of the test not with judgment, but with curiosity. What part of the conversation has grown quieter, and how might it be invited to speak again? Aging is often spoken about as a gradual loss, a slow erosion of strength, balance, and certainty. Yet when viewed through a scientific lens, aging is less about disappearance and more about transformation. The human body does not simply weaken with time, it reorganizes itself. Muscles, nerves, and even the brain adjust their priorities, responding to decades of experience, adaptation, and survival. What we often label as weakness is, in many cases, a change in how the body chooses to communicate and protect itself. From early adulthood, the nervous system is optimized for speed and responsiveness. Movements are fast, reactions sharp, and balance corrections almost invisible. As years pass, the brain becomes more economical. It learns which movements are essential and which can be avoided without immediate consequence. This economy of effort is not a flaw. It is a sophisticated strategy shaped by energy conservation, accumulated injury, and the wisdom of restraint. However, this strategy can gradually narrow the range of movements the body is willing to perform without hesitation. Muscle tissue reflects this shift in communication. Strength does decline with age, but far more subtle is the change in how muscle fibers are recruited. In younger bodies, the brain easily calls upon high-threshold muscle fibers for quick, powerful actions. In older bodies, these fibers are still present, but the brain becomes reluctant to engage them unless absolutely necessary. This reluctance is not failure, it is caution encoded at a neurological level. The body remembers instability, pain, and near falls more vividly than comfort, and it adjusts its messaging accordingly. Balance offers another window into this altered communication. Maintaining balance is an ongoing dialogue between sensory systems. The eyes provide visual orientation, the inner ear senses head movement, and receptors in the joints and skin report position and pressure. With age, each of these systems remains functional, yet their integration becomes less seamless. The brain may favor one source of information over another, often relying more heavily on vision and less on internal cues. This reweighting changes how secure a movement feels, even if the physical ability to perform it remains intact. What emerges is not a broken system, but a more conservative one. Movements that once flowed without thought now require conscious planning. Standing up, turning, or stepping quickly becomes a calculated act rather than an instinctive response. This shift can feel like weakness, but it is more accurately described as a change in the body's internal dialogue. The brain asks more questions before acting, and the muscles wait for clearer instructions. Emotion plays a quiet but powerful role in this process. Fear of falling, even when subtle, alters motor patterns. Scientific studies show that perceived risk can reduce muscle activation and slow reaction times. The body does not distinguish sharply between physical and emotional signals, both influence movement. Over time, a single fall or near miss can echo through the nervous system, reshaping how future movements are initiated. The result is a body that appears weaker, when in reality it is being restrained by protective signaling. This protective communication extends to posture and movement habits. Older adults often adopt slower, more deliberate movements as a way to maintain control. While this strategy reduces immediate risk, it can also limit the stimulation needed to keep neural pathways active. Muscles and nerves thrive on varied, meaningful use. When movement becomes too predictable or minimal, the conversation between brain and body grows quieter, not because it is impossible, but because it is no longer practiced. There is a profound implication here. If aging were simply a matter of physical decay, there would be little room for change. But because so much of the observed decline arises from altered communication, there is potential for renewal. The nervous system retains plasticity well into advanced age. It can relearn patterns, rebuild confidence, and restore clearer messaging when given the right conditions. This does not require intensity or force, but consistency and intention. Understanding aging as a shift in communication reframes how we approach health after 80. Instead of asking how much strength has been lost, we begin to ask how effectively the brain is sending and receiving signals. Instead of blaming muscles for not responding, we consider whether they are being invited to respond at all. This perspective fosters compassion, replacing frustration with curiosity. The human body is not static. Even in later life, it remains responsive to experience. When movements are reintroduced slowly and safely, the nervous system updates its expectations. Muscles that were once underutilized begin to re-engage. Balance systems recalibrate. Confidence, rooted in repeated success, starts to return. None of this happens abruptly, but it unfolds through repeated, respectful communication. Seen this way, aging becomes less about decline and more about dialogue. The body speaks differently, listens more carefully, and values safety more deeply. When we learn to listen in return, we discover that what appeared to be weakness was often a whisper asking for reassurance, practice, and trust restored over time. Standing up from a chair appears simple, yet beneath this familiar action lies a finely tuned biological sequence that draws on nearly every major system in the body. After the age of 80, this sequence often becomes disrupted, not suddenly, but gradually, as small physiological changes accumulate and begin to influence one another. Understanding why standing becomes harder requires looking beyond the surface of muscle strength and into the deeper coordination between force, timing, and perception. The movement begins with intention. The brain decides to stand, and this decision triggers preparatory adjustments before any visible motion occurs. The torso leans forward slightly, shifting the center of mass over the feet. This forward shift is critical. Without it, the legs must generate far more force to lift the body vertically, a task that becomes increasingly demanding with age. In many older adults, this forward lean is reduced either due to stiffness, fear of imbalance, or long-standing movement habits. The result is an inefficient pattern that makes standing feel disproportionately difficult. Muscle strength plays an obvious role, particularly in the quadriceps and gluteal muscles. With aging, these muscles tend to lose size and power, a process influenced by hormonal changes, reduced activity, and altered protein metabolism. However, research consistently shows that strength loss alone does not fully explain difficulty rising from a chair. Many individuals retain sufficient muscle mass but struggle to activate it quickly and in the correct sequence. This points to a neurological component that is often overlooked. The nervous system's ability to recruit muscle fibers changes with age. Fast-twitch fibers, responsible for quick bursts of power, become less readily accessible. They are not necessarily gone, but the brain becomes hesitant to engage them unless strongly prompted. Standing up requires a brief surge of power, not prolonged effort. When this surge is delayed or incomplete, the movement stalls. What feels like weakness is often a timing issue, where force arrives too late to be useful. Joint health further complicates the picture. The knees, hips, and ankles must move through specific ranges to allow the body to rise smoothly. Even mild stiffness or discomfort can alter movement patterns. The body instinctively avoids positions associated with pain, and over time, this avoidance reshapes how the joints are used. Reduced joint motion changes leverage, forcing muscles to work harder in less favorable positions. This inefficiency amplifies the sense of effort and instability. Balance mechanisms are also deeply involved. As the body transitions from sitting to standing, it passes through a moment of instability when the center of mass shifts upward and forward. The inner ear, visual system, and proprioceptive sensors in the feet and joints must rapidly coordinate to maintain equilibrium. With age, these systems remain functional but slower to integrate. The brain may wait for confirmation from multiple sources before committing fully to the movement, introducing hesitation at a critical moment. Circulation plays a quieter but significant role. Standing up causes a sudden change in blood distribution as gravity pulls blood toward the lower extremities. In younger individuals, the cardiovascular system compensates instantly. After 80, this response can be slower, leading to brief drops in blood pressure that create sensations of lightheadedness or weakness. Even when subtle, these sensations teach the brain to be cautious, reinforcing slower, more guarded movements. There is also the influence of habitual movement patterns. Years of using armrests, pushing off the thighs, or avoiding low chairs gradually teach the body to rely on external support. While these strategies are practical, they reduce the demand placed on leg muscles and balance systems. Over time, the neural pathways involved in standing without assistance receive less stimulation. The body adapts by reallocating resources elsewhere, making unsupported standing feel unfamiliar rather than impossible. Psychological factors intertwine with physiology in powerful ways. Anticipation of difficulty can alter muscle activation before movement even begins. Studies show that expectation of instability reduces force output as the brain prioritizes control over power. This protective response is logical, yet it creates a self-reinforcing cycle. The more standing feels difficult, the more cautiously it is attempted, and the less effectively the necessary systems are engaged. All of these elements converge in the moment someone attempts to rise from a chair. The challenge is not a single failing, but a convergence of slowed signaling, altered mechanics, and learned caution. Each system contributes a small delay or inefficiency, and together they transform a once effortless movement into a demanding task. This explains why standing can feel unpredictable, easy one day and difficult the next, depending on fatigue, confidence, and context. Importantly, this complexity also explains why improvement is possible. Because standing difficulty arises from coordination rather than irreversible loss, targeted practice can restore much of the missing efficiency. When movements are repeated slowly and safely, the brain relearns timing, joints regain confidence in their range, and muscles become more responsive. The body remembers how to stand, not as a command, but as a rediscovered conversation between systems that were never truly silent. When movement is reduced to its simplest form, the body often responds with surprising intelligence. The 3 exercises discussed here are not remarkable because they are new or complex, but because they speak directly to the nervous system in a language it understands. They do not demand strength as a prerequisite, they cultivate it as a byproduct of clarity and repetition. In advanced age, this distinction becomes essential because the body is no longer persuaded by force, but by reassurance. Each of these movements acts as a signal rather than a challenge. Slow chair rises, for example, are not about standing quickly or perfectly. They are about reminding the brain of a familiar pattern that may have faded from regular use. When the movement is slowed down, the nervous system has time to observe and adjust. Muscles engage gradually, balance systems contribute without panic, and confidence begins to replace hesitation. This deliberate pace reduces the perception of threat, allowing the brain to release more complete motor commands. Seated leg lifts work in a similarly subtle way. Lifting the leg while seated appears modest, almost insignificant, yet it reactivates key muscles involved in standing without the complication of full body weight. More importantly, it strengthens the connection between intention and response. The brain sends a signal, the muscle answers, and that successful exchange builds trust. Repetition reinforces this dialogue, encouraging the nervous system to recruit muscle fibers more readily when greater effort is required. Supported balance holds introduce the body to instability in a controlled environment. By holding onto a stable surface, the individual can explore small shifts in weight without fear of falling. This exploration is crucial. Balance is not a static state, it is a continuous process of correction. When older adults avoid balance challenges entirely, the systems responsible for these corrections grow less responsive. Supported holds reawaken them gently, allowing the inner ear, vision, and proprioceptive sensors to recalibrate their collaboration. What makes these exercises particularly effective is their ability to reverse learned caution. Over time, the body associates certain movements with risk. Standing, lifting, or shifting weight may trigger subconscious restraint. By breaking these movements into smaller, safer components, the exercises bypass this restraint. The nervous system no longer perceives a threat, and as a result, it allows fuller engagement. Strength emerges not from strain, but from permission. Scientific research supports this approach. Studies on motor learning show that slow, controlled movements enhance neural plasticity more effectively than rushed or maximal efforts in older adults. The brain benefits from clear sensory feedback, which is easier to process at lower speeds. When movements are performed with attention, sensory signals become sharper, helping the brain refine its predictions and responses. This refinement translates into smoother, more confident standing over time. There is also an emotional dimension to these exercises that should not be overlooked. Success, even in small movements, releases a sense of agency. When an individual realizes they can lift a leg higher or stand with less assistance than before, the brain updates its expectations. These updates influence future movements, reducing fear and increasing willingness to engage. In this way, physical progress and emotional reassurance reinforce each other. The simplicity of these exercises allows them to be practiced frequently, which is essential for change. The nervous system responds to consistency more than intensity. Repeated exposure to safe movement strengthens neural pathways and restores automaticity. What was once effortful begins to feel familiar again. The body does not need to be pushed, it needs to be reminded over time. These gentle movements begin to overlap in their effects. Chair rises improve leg strength and coordination. Leg lifts enhance muscle activation and joint awareness. Balance holds refine sensory integration. Together, they recreate the essential components of standing in isolation before reassembling them into a complete movement. This method respects the body's need for clarity and reduces the cognitive load associated with complex actions. Perhaps most importantly, these exercises acknowledge the dignity of the aging body. They do not frame limitations as failures, but as signals pointing toward adaptation. By meeting the body where it is, rather than where it once was, they foster a sense of cooperation rather than conflict. The body responds positively to this cooperation, gradually revealing capabilities that had been obscured by caution. In this process, progress may appear modest from the outside, but internally it represents a profound shift. The nervous system becomes more willing to engage, muscles respond with greater confidence, and balance feels less precarious. Standing up transforms from a moment of uncertainty into a familiar, rehearsed sequence. What began as 3 simple exercises evolves into a renewed conversation between mind and body, one that speaks of resilience rather than limitation. Movement in later life is often approached with urgency, as if the body must be corrected or rescued before time runs out. Yet biology responds differently. The aging body does not thrive under pressure, it responds to care, patience, and understanding. Compassionate movement is not a sentimental idea, but a scientifically grounded approach that recognizes how the nervous system learns, protects, and adapts across the lifespan. When movement is offered with respect rather than demand, the body listens more closely. After 80, the nervous system becomes highly sensitive to perceived threat. Sudden or forceful movements can trigger protective reflexes that limit muscle activation and disrupt balance. This response is not a sign of fragility, but of intelligence. The brain has learned, through experience, that recovery from injury takes longer and consequences can be greater. Compassionate movement works with this intelligence instead of opposing it. By creating an environment of safety, it allows the brain to relax its protective grip. Gentle, intentional movement sends a different message. It tells the nervous system that exploration is allowed, that mistakes are not dangerous, and that the body is supported. This message alters how muscles are recruited. Instead of bracing defensively, they engage cooperatively. Scientific studies on motor control show that reduced fear leads to more efficient muscle coordination and smoother movement patterns. Compassion, in this sense, becomes a biological tool. There is also the matter of attention. Compassionate movement invites awareness without judgment. When attention is calm, sensory information is processed more accurately. The brain receives clearer feedback from joints, muscles, and balance organs. This clarity improves motor planning and reduces unnecessary tension. The body moves not with force, but with alignment, conserving energy while increasing stability. Respectful movement also honors variability. No two aging bodies are the same, even at the same chronological age. Pain levels, mobility, and confidence fluctuate daily. Compassionate practice adapts to these fluctuations rather than ignoring them. On days when movement feels limited, smaller efforts are still meaningful. On days when energy is higher, the body can explore more. This flexibility prevents the discouragement that often leads to inactivity. From a physiological standpoint, slow and controlled movements enhance circulation without overwhelming the cardiovascular system. They promote joint lubrication, reduce stiffness, and stimulate muscle fibers that are often neglected. Over time, these effects accumulate. Strength returns gradually, balance improves subtly, and endurance increases without strain. The body experiences progress as safety rather than stress. The psychological impact of compassionate movement is equally significant. Older adults often internalize societal narratives that equate aging with decline. This belief can influence posture, movement choices, and willingness to engage physically. Compassionate practice counters this narrative by emphasizing capability rather than loss. Each successful movement, however small, reinforces a sense of agency. The brain records these successes, adjusting expectations and reducing anticipatory fear. Trust plays a central role in this process. Trust is not blind confidence, but informed reassurance built through repeated positive experiences. When the body learns that movement does not result in pain or instability, it becomes more willing to participate. Muscles respond more fully, balance reactions become quicker, and movements feel less effortful. Trust transforms the relationship between mind and body from one of caution to cooperation. There is a deeper philosophical dimension to compassionate movement as well. It reflects an understanding that the body is not an object to be controlled, but a living system to be engaged. Aging invites a shift from domination to dialogue. Movement becomes a conversation in which the body's responses are listened to and respected. This dialogue fosters resilience, not by resisting change, but by adapting intelligently to it. In practical terms, compassionate movement encourages consistency over intensity. The nervous system learns best through repetition in safe contexts. Daily, gentle practice reinforces neural pathways and keeps communication channels open. Over time, movements that once required conscious effort regain an element of automaticity. Standing, walking, and balancing feel less like tests and more like expressions of life. Perhaps the most profound outcome of compassionate movement is the restoration of dignity. When older adults move without fear of judgment or failure, they reclaim ownership of their bodies. This ownership extends beyond physical function into emotional well-being. Movement becomes a source of reassurance rather than anxiety, a reminder that the body, even in advanced age, remains responsive and capable of growth. In this way, compassionate movement is not merely an exercise philosophy, but a form of biological respect. It acknowledges the wisdom accumulated in the body over decades and builds upon it gently. Through patience, awareness, and kindness, the aging body reveals that resilience is not about pushing harder, but about listening more deeply and moving forward with trust intact.